They go to pick up Xander, who's Bassett's son, Mace's son.
And they say they're gonna go to their uncle's house?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they have to get out because, Nero says, oh, the cops...
They're gonna figure out that I
ran your plates. They're gonna figure out who you are. They're gonna go. So we need to disappear. So they pick up, and there's a real cute exchange between Lenny and Xander, where it's obvious that they know each other. He said earlier, hey, how's Xander? I miss him. When he's talking to Mace, when she's nursing him after he got beat up in the apartment. He's talking about Xander, and then when they go to the house, he's like, hey, Xander, how's it going? We're going to go for a ride, we're going to go over here, and they go to the uncle's house. And Mace is very much against, like, the quips and the dealing with the squid stuff. But, Nero tells her, you need to see this because it's the quip that Iris had that shows the murder of Jericho 1 and shows that the two cops were responsible for it. So he has to show that to her. And she's really shaken up by it. And then realizes that if this got out, like, this could destroy us all. Because the city is, like, one step away from eating itself alive with, all the racial tension. So there's that debate as to what to do with the clip. Do we take it to the cops and expose them, or Gant, who's the one who wired up Iris because Jericho 1 was one of his artists and he was paranoid that Jericho 1 was going to leave. He's the one who wired up Iris. Gant wants the clip in exchange for Faith. He says, I'll let Faith go if you give us the clip. He doesn't care about Faith, but he knows that that's what Lenny wants. So he wants to trade what's most important to Lenny, and what's most important for him. And then there's that debate between Lenny and Mace as to what do we do. And Mace tells him this is something that's very important. This can change things, and if you go to trade that, you and I are no longer friends. And Lenny goes to walk off. And then Mace is pretty upset about that. And she goes to leave, and then Nero ends up finding her again and grabbing her and saying, hey, take it to the commissioner. He's the most honest cop I know. You need to show him this. I'll get Faith back on my own. Because he does realize, yes, this is important. Not worth her. This is more important. I'll figure out a way to get her without actually giving up this collateral.
So then Mace goes to talk to the cop, right?
To the commissioner, and she shows up in the men's room.
And she's like, look, you take this gear and watch this tape right now if you want to know who
killed Jericho.
Yeah. And the commissioner's not really, or he seems like he's not really having it. And he just immediately is just like, if it wasn't New Year's Eve, I would have you arrested for having this illegal gear or whatever.
And, I mean, she's in the bathroom. She's surrounded by cops.
And, yeah.
And he basically just gives one of the cops, the nod to grab her and pull her out of there.
And she's like, I fucking knew it. And she throws a fit or whatever, and they throw her out. And then, do we switch back to what Nero's doing?
Yeah.
At that time?
He's going up to the room to try to rescue Faith.
And I think he goes into whatever suite that he thinks that they're in. And he puts on the squid, right?
Yep, he finds that.
He puts it on, and then he watches what looks like the killer throughout the film, the faceless killer throughout the film, is about to rape Faith.
Yeah.
Right?
In this, I mentioned it at the beginning. I didn't know if I really wanted to talk about it. It is pretty harrowing, but Iris is killed. is raped and murdered in the way that you start to see Faith being raped.
But then, as it progresses, we realize that Faith is in on it, and that it's actually Sizemore's character, right, orchestrating this whole thing against them.
He was paid by Gant to follow Faith around. He also happened to be Nero's best friend, so there's some tension over that. But then Nero is, hey man, can you at least keep an eye on her, make sure she stays out of trouble? And he says, yeah, absolutely. But obviously he's in it for other things. He and Faith are fucking. But then that's when Nero realizes what has happened and, takes it off, and then, there he is.
So then this big fight kind of ensues.
Wait, before the fight, though, there's the scene where, Sizemore and Fiennes are, like, kind of putting it together.
Yeah.
Which I love the way that it's shot, because as he's telling the story, the camera angle on him keeps switching. Like, just slightly. It's like dead on, and then it's to the side, and then it's like a profile. As he's, kind of, I don't want to say like in the James Bond fashion of like breaking down the entire thing, but like as he's kind of covering that conspiracy, just the way that it's shot is awesome because the angle on him keeps changing. And that was always one of my favorite, like, shots in the scene, or in that film. It's just how differently he's shot as he's telling that story. But yes, and then the fight scene, which is kind of brutal.
Yeah. So, there, Sizemore and Fiennes are fighting. I think then Faith, or Juliette Lewis's character, comes up behind Sizemore and like puts him in like this headlock thing, and she ends up pulling off what I guess he had been wearing a wig the whole time, like recording everything.
Well, there's a couple mentions of it earlier on in the film. He mentions in the very beginning that the reason he's no longer a cop is because he got injured in the line of duty. He mentions that he got shot in the back of the head. Managed to survive it. But then later on, when they're analyzing the clip of the rape and murder, Lenny's fence, Tick, says something like, something is wrong with his, his like cerebral cortex. Like, he's got some kind of injury or some kind of head trauma because he's almost like colorblind. So something's not right. And then, she pulls off the wig. You realize he's bald because he had been shot in the back of the head. So the reason he's the killer, and it's been mentioned throughout the film, is because he has that head trauma. Well, not the reason that he's the killer, but we established that he had head trauma, and that's what Tick saw when he was analyzing the clip. If that makes any sense at all, as we're talking about this. But yeah, he gets the wig pulled off. And it turns out that wasn't he recording all the stuff too? That was like under the wig?
He had a squid underneath.
I mean, I guess that works for him. He's a PI. He sees and records everything that he, does.
I wonder how much all that costs. Like, recording for extensive amount of time,
You can charge your rates, man.
Yeah. But anyway, so they're fighting, and they throw each other through the sliding door to the balcony, right? Nero manages to shift his weight and throw Sizemore over, and
first he gets stabbed in the shoulder.
Oh, that's right.
He gets stabbed in the shoulder, which is really fucking brutal. And then it's even more brutal because they fall out of through the glass window onto the balcony, and I know that Lenny lands on his shoulder with that knife sticking out of it. But yeah, and then he tosses him over the balcony and he's hanging on.
hanging on by Nero's tie.
One of those fucking gaudy ties.
And then he's like, come here, like, I'm gonna take you with me. Or what.
Just to be an extra dick about it.
And then Nero reaches back and pulls out the knife that he had been stabbed with just prior. And
Feels like it would hurt so bad.
And then cuts the tie off, which sends Max goes falling down. And keep in mind, this is while that big party is happening in LA. And then he just eats shit on like
It looks awful, like when he lands on the van.
It's like a TV van or something, right?
Yeah, it looks really brutal.
And I feel like there's not a big reaction. Like, people are just like, what?
Yeah.
But not a big reaction either. But they actually show the fall.
Yeah.
You know?
There's one, like, brief moment where you can see him falling down the side of the building. You can see the wire that's on the stuff.
Oh, really?
Yeah. You can see it in Die Hard, too, when McClane throws Gruber out the window. You can kind of see it, like, there's just enough of the light catching the wire as they're falling, but you can only see it briefly. And then it's still a great shot. But man, like when he lands on the roof of the van, it's fucking brutal. So then Mace, we cut back to Mace, who's being chased by the cops, the two rogue cops, Fichtner and D'Onofrio. And they're chasing her through the crowd.
Just fucking shooting people.
Yeah, like D'Onofrio's like shooting, and he's hitting all the like kinds of innocent bystanders. And then they track her, or they chase her to, you know, kind of a clearing next to some scaffolding. Don't see her. She manages to come up behind them and get the drop on them. Smashes them in the back of the head. And then manages to get him down. Then she hits him with the club. She steals like his club.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Beats him up with that, and then as Fichtner rounds the corner, she grabs D'Onofrio's taser and tases Fichtner. Manages to get them both down. Pulls the gun out, sticks it to the head, manages to handcuff him
together.
Yeah.
And then she handcuffs D'Onofrio's character to the scaffolding.
Yep.
And by this time we have like what looks like
riot cops,
or
cops with like the riot gear on, because they're at a big crowd. You know, there's probably trouble expected at some point. Tell her to drop her weapon because she has D'Onofrio's pistol. So she goes to drop it. They go to get her down, and then it turns into like the Rodney King stuff. Basically, they just start wailing on her, even though she's clearly surrendering and is down on the ground.
Because she's like, oh, you don't know what... Let me explain to you what's actually happening.
She's putting the gun down,
mm-hmm.
But they just completely go for her. And it's awful.
Yeah. Because it's like, what, 6 guys?
Yeah.
On one person?
Yeah, and it's no coincidence at all that looks like the Rodney King beating. So it just, everyone in the crowd is watching this, and then it's like the spark, man, because one kid just looks and just cannot take it anymore, and ends up jumping on like one of the riot cops, and then everyone else just joins in, like they've had enough of this shit too, and they clearly outnumber and overpower the riot cops, and they're got them down, and they're beating them up, and they're using their own clubs on them. And then it's just chaos, and there's the scenes of, you know, just the overhead shots of the crowd just wailing on these riot cops. And like the whole melee, and there's even like the helicopter floating around in the area, which looked nuts because I thought that helicopters weren't allowed to get so close to the actors in scenes anymore because of what happened on the Twilight Zone movie. But that helicopter looks like it's pretty low above the crowd.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's just a perspective from the shot being a downward angle. But it's an utter melee. down there. And then Strickland, the commissioner,